Hello, and welcome to The Archive, a show where we talk about books, history, and politics. Today we are talking about Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay. I just finished Bad Feminist, and the book is essentially a collection of essays that discusses the author, Roxane Gay's life, literary and film critiques, as well as political commentary on blackness, fatness, and obviously gender. It talks about what it means to be a good feminist. And I think that a lot of people think about the phrase good feminist and think, okay, it's someone who has decentered men from their life, someone who has economic independence, a high-paying job, rejects patriarchal religion, maybe leans in for some liberal feminists, that you can do it all, have 2.5 kids, and the salary to support them. For, some in the derogatory sense, maybe someone that goes 50-50 on dates. And that kind of question is central to Roxane Gay's work. And, Gay is kind of struggling with this idea of being a bad feminist. And so maybe somebody that is a bad feminist, she makes this joke herself, as someone who actually enjoys giving blowjobs. Someone who has an off-again, on-again hookup that's socially conservative. Someone that wants to be taken care of and have someone to come home to. And I think that what's really interesting about this text is that Gay, she brings up her own contradictions. She doesn't shy away from that within the text. And living authentically as a feminist in the 21st century, I think that a lot of women feel this kind of push and pull between what is idealized as being a good feminist and what is the reality for most women. And so this is why ultimately Gay decides that she is going to kind of accept the label as bad feminist so that she can practice her feminism imperfectly and live in a way that is authentic to herself. So, chapter by chapter, these are just some chapters that really piqued my interest. One was the chapter called Unlikable Female Characters. And in the chapter, Not Here to Make Friends, Gay discusses the pushback that writers receive when their female characters are deemed unlikable. She writes, "In literature, as in life, the rules are all too often different for girls. There are many instances in which an unlikable man is billed as an anti-hero. An unlikable man is inscrutable, interesting, dark, or tormented, but ultimately compelling, even when he might behave in distasteful ways." So some examples of the unlikable man can kind of range from Holden Caulfield for the crime of being annoying. I love Holden Caulfield, actually. To Patrick Bateman for mildly more severe crimes. And an example of kind of an infamous, unlikable female character could be Amy from Gone Girl. Although, when I was reading this chapter, I thought this book was written in 2014, and I believe that since then, the audience's tolerance for unlikable female characters has gone up dramatically. The entire good for her genre of cinema, for example, we have Fleabag, Pearl, Midsummer, Shiv from Succession, Girl Interrupted, Cersei from Game of Thrones. We have women who cheat, backstab, sometimes literally, and altogether are very flawed and not necessarily the most likable. They're not necessarily women that everyone would want to be friends with. But this is normal because women are people too. I recently watched Challengers, and I think that that narrative represents a modicum of progress as well, as Channy cheats... Wait, did I just call her Channy? Oh my gosh. I actually forgot her name in the actual movie. Oh my gosh. Channy, not Channy. What is her name? Okay, if you watched it, She cheats on her very loyal husband multiple times, but, viewers are still very sympathetic towards her. Although at the same time, I agree with, Gay's analysis that sometimes readers are looking for a friend in a book and dislike it on the basis of the character rather than the quality of the writing. And actually, I think that I've definitely fallen prey to this mindset. After being recommended this book like a million times, I ultimately did not like My Year of Rest and Relaxation. Please put your pitchforks down, which became kind of the poster book for upper-class mentally ill white women. I found the characters so insufferable that it was difficult to enjoy the technical aspects of the writing. I have no qualms with Moshfe's writing. In fact, it's an accomplishment to create a character that feels so real and so annoying. But I was in the minority. Many love this book for those exact qualities. So, as the question to pose to the audience, I'm curious, who is your favorite unlikable female character? There's also the chapter on trigger warnings, and Gay takes an interesting stance on trigger warnings that I notice is popular with more maybe older millennials. I remember that the same issue came up in the book Conflict is Not Abuse, where the author Sarah Schulman, who is also a professor, argues that trigger warnings can prevent victims from being able to fully process and instead lay blame on others. Schulman also mentioned that at her working class institution, quote, no one has ever asked for a trigger warning. She states, it is a very entitled position to believe that you have the right and the ability to control other people. Although Gay's position is a little bit different. She writes, there are things that rip my skin open and reveal what lies beneath, but I don't believe in trigger warnings. I don't believe people can be protected from their histories. I don't believe it is at all possible to anticipate the histories of others. She makes several arguments for why she doesn't believe in trigger warnings. The first being that there is no universal standard for trigger warnings. She says, once you start, where do you stop? Does the mention of the word rape require a trigger warning, or is the threshold an account of rape? How graphic does an account of abuse need to be before meriting a warning? Are trigger warnings required any time matters of difference are broached? What is graphic? Who makes these determinations? Secondly, Gay writes that when used in excess, she believes that trigger warnings approach censorship, compromising the ability for people to speak their truth publicly without warning. Her last point regarding the impact of trigger warnings on those who they are purported to protect, Schulman would be in agreement with. Gay writes, maybe trigger warnings allow people to avoid learning how to deal with triggers and getting help. I will say that I disagree with Schulman when she says that asking for a trigger warning is entitled. The way that I see it, people are allowed and should be able to express their needs. In reaction to that, others are allowed to say no. For example, take a veteran who has come home from war and is now displaying symptoms of PTSD. Our veteran wants to go to a 4th of July party, but they have a sensitivity to loud noises that could send them into a panic. Would it be entitled for that person to ask the host, can you let me know if there will be fireworks? I feel that most people would completely understand their situation. Survivors of sexual assault often display PTSD symptoms, so if it's possible, why not make things mildly more comfortable for them? At the end of the day, requests for trigger warnings are just that, requests. Although I understand Gay's hesitation about censorship, I recently saw someone online ask if a creator could put a trigger warning for the word bisexual. I ultimately think that most people use them reasonably for victims of abuse and depictions of graphic violence. I like the fact, for example, that TV shows let you know if a particular episode will be extremely violent. Like, sometimes I'm just not in the mood to stomach that sort of thing. In terms of the critique on the negative impact that trigger warnings have on victims, I believe that Gay kind of contradicts herself, as earlier in the essay she discusses how anything can be a trigger and how you cannot possibly know someone else's personal history and what may trigger them. I agree with that. That's completely true. It's exactly due to that fact that I don't believe that trigger warnings allow people to avoid learning how to deal with triggers because, like Gay said, triggers are everywhere. A professor choosing to let students know that a text will contain graphic accounts of sexual violence will not protect survivors when they speak with others, read a book, or even just exist in public. The classroom is one specific context, and the reality is that unfortunately, many victims will be triggered over and over again throughout the course of day to day life. They will be forced to learn how to deal with their triggers, regardless of whether or not we use trigger warnings within limited contexts. Ultimately, I'm of the mind that if we can provide someone with what little relief from anxiety and trauma they may get throughout a lifetime, why not do so? If it's not substantially disrupting the medium, it's quite a small ask. The question that I'd like to ask to the audience is, do you think that trigger warnings are valuable? Have they helped you in some way, whether in an academic context or when you consume media? Or do you feel that they might impede already traumatized people from being able to process triggers in the real world? In the next chapter, The Politics of Respectability Politics, Gay writes of people who buy into respectability politics that because they have achieved success, because they have transcended in some way the effects of racism or other forms of discrimination, all people should be able to do the same. Hashtag Black Excellence, hashtag Black Girl Magic. This particular quote made me think about the end of Beyonce's documentary Homecoming, which I absolutely love. I watch the documentary regularly to feel inspired, although, even I can't ignore the shortcoming of both Beyonce and Jay-Z's politics. At the end of the Homecoming documentary, Beyonce says something to the effect of, "If my country ass can do it, you can do it." I love this part, and I think that it achieves what it's meant to do. It leaves the audience feeling open to possibility. But upon further investigation, we can problematize this statement. When Beyonce says that we can do it, I imagine that she means that we can also achieve our dreams. However, if she means that we too can become billionaires, achieve the kind of world-building wealth that herself and her husband have accumulated, unfortunately, we cannot all do it. Black faces in high places at all. And furthermore, wealth accumulation as a method for escaping institutional racism is ineffective. High-class black folk can certainly access spaces that are cut off from the majority, but even within those spaces, they will still be held back by the perniciousness of racism. Beyonce and Jay-Z know this all too well, considering that Jay-Z took the stage at the 2024 Grammys to address the Academy's shortcomings in recognizing black musicians, particularly Beyonce, and her lack of Album of the Year award. Gay writes, "We must stop pointing to the exceptions, those bright shining stars who transcend circumstance. We must look to how we can best support the least among us, not spend all of our time blindly revering and trying to mimic the greatest without demanding systemic change." There is also a chapter on how to be friends with another woman, which I thought was interesting. It talks about the kind of idea, the cultural idea that female friendships are fraught, are complicated, and are extremely intense. And I enjoyed this chapter. It has some rules for how to be friends with another woman. For example, it states, "A lot of ink is given over to mythologizing female friendships as curious, fragile relationships that are always intensely fraught. Stop reading writing that encourages this mythology." I thought that this was really interesting because personally, I myself definitely struggle with female friendship in general, but I think that the reason that female friendships are difficult for so many women is because women are encouraged to have more emotionally intimate relationships with other women, which can lead to additional conflict. I would also agree that depictions of female friendship in media are very intense and fraught with backstabbing, cheating, betrayal, and the like. So if you watch shows like Gossip Girl, you have Blair and Serena. In Friends, Monica and Rachel. And more recently in Euphoria, Cassie and Maddie. And each of those relationships that I described are quite complex, have several layers of competition between the girls, whether that be for male attention, for success in a general sense. I think that a lot of women are really intensely craving a kind of friendship that is different, perhaps, than these ones represented on screen. Although I wouldn't say Monica and Rachel are too bad. I mean, they support each other. Serena and Blair, it's just a mess. But I feel like many women are looking for a healthier relationship between female friendships, and there are many examples of that in real life, of groups of female friends that genuinely support each other, that are not competitive with each other, that are able to communicate when there is conflict, and a skill that I think that many of us unfortunately lack, that are able to repair and commit ourselves to conflict resolution. Because in this generation of ghosting, blocking somebody on all social media and never talking to them again, we haven't always worked on the skills required to say, how do we repair a relationship when there has been harm or some kind of perceived harm? The way that I see it, I don't believe that it is easier to have male friendships. Rather, I think that when women say that they prefer to be friends with men, the friendship of men is held at a lower expectation. So they don't expect as much from their male friends as they would from female friends, and therefore the male friends are able to kind of fly under the radar. You don't get in much conflict with them because you didn't expect much from them in the first place. So, for example, within female friendships, a common expectation will be that they are emotionally present, that they will listen to you vent, maybe even, many, many times about the same situationship, about the same relationship, that they will remain open and listening. Whereas with these male friends, there is a sort of even honor that is put upon how men can communicate in very harsh ways, or, just tell someone, oh, he's not into you. It's just because he's not into you. Whereas if a female friend said that, perhaps some women would take it extremely hurtfully. So rather than it being easier to be friends with men, I think that the standard for men is lower in what they're supposed to bring to friendship. And I have definitely seen before women who will drop a friend because they weren't able to make it to their birthday dinner, because they didn't answer their text when they were in need, but will allow a male friend to not respond, ignore, harm, etc., without much accountability, because they're assumed to just be naturally kind of less intimate friendships. So those are my thoughts on Roxane Gay's Bad Feminist. I enjoyed reading this work. I liked that it was a series of mini essays that have a common through line, but are not necessarily successive or building on each other. And I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do not forget to like and subscribe for more, and have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.